be a colony of either the United States or China in the online world? No.
Good. Let us try to unpack this a little bit. So first of all, coming back to this elephant soup of all these different regulations, right? Just a couple of sentences about that. The AI Act is a recently enacted law on the European level that needs to still be transposed in many countries, including Germany, but it is supposed to regulate the application of so-called artificial intelligence products. They can be various. The DSA is the Digital Services Act that tries to regulate platforms, not just social media platforms, but platforms in general, so also Amazon, for example, as a e-commerce platform, mandating that, for example, these platforms provide more transparency about how their recommender systems work and do some risk management and so on. And then the DMA is the Digital Markets Act that tries to go at it from a antitrust and competition regulation perspective. And I think this already lays out a little the different approaches that we have, but also, and this is what both Maria and Marike were talking about, is of course building alternatives, because it's very hard to switch from one, let's say paradigm to the other if you don't have anything to switch to. And at the moment, there are few alternatives, especially to the large providers, be it on this very basic or very fundamental technological level. So let's say cloud providers, it's very hard to, even as a business, have an alternative to one of these so-called hyperscaler companies that are Amazon and Google and Microsoft, but it's also quite difficult as a consumer to switch to alternatives. I would say, technologically, it's very easy to switch from WhatsApp to Signal or to the Matrix application in the Philippines. It gives you the same features. But the problem, of course, are these so-called network effects, where everyone you know is already on that other platform. And you then have to run around and try to convince everyone else, to switch with you. So this is very general, of course. And the question that I have is, what are the actions that both governments and citizens can take at the moment when it comes to strengthening these alternatives? And this is too broad of a question. I'll start with Marike this time. You talked about we need to have these alternative offers. Now, the European Union has some money to invest. Do you think it's been invested wisely at the moment?
Also, I'm glad you mentioned network effect. So why is everybody on Facebook? Because everybody is on Facebook. But they can also work against companies. Because once the trust starts unraveling, and I think all the ingredients are there for it, the switch can also be very quick because people are really craving alternatives. And when it's clear where people go, they will go. I mean, I know lots of organizations, companies, governments, where the question of tech sovereignty, alternatives for dependence on American technologies, hopefully also Chinese or Israeli technologies that are undesirable, is on the table as a point to deal with. Where I think the European Commission is really missing an opportunity is not, yes, they are making available some money and that's fine, but they can have the biggest impact by using the power of their purse wisely. To me, it is absurd and unacceptable that we, Europeans, through our pension funds, through our taxpayer money, are subsidizing the success of the big tech companies in America, which are propping up the stock market, which is propping up Donald Trump. And why would we do this? Why would we do this? And so oftentimes I get the question, but is it possible for Europeans to move to European alternatives? And my answer is always, I will talk about whether it's possible once we give it a try. I'm not going to preempt by saying it won't work because we have never seriously tried. We are still transferring enormous amounts of money away from investing those into our own companies. And this is not a sort of nationalism inspired story, but it is one that takes into consideration that the companies that provide the infrastructure of our lives fall under our laws. And I think that is really important. So if I were the European Commission, I would use government procurement, so the purchasing of technologies to lead the way of how to do things differently. Because when the European Commission says we're switching from, I don't know, Google, Microsoft, Amazon to European alternatives, it will also send a signal to national governments, to local governments, to hospitals, museums, schools, that this is okay within government procurement rules, so basically the contracts that governments give out. And then you will see that investors, including the ones that sit in Silicon Valley, will sniff an opportunity, and they will also start bringing their money to Europe. So I'm always inspired by the Ukrainians for many reasons, but also because of the enormous speed with which they have become incredibly innovative in producing technologies. Again, the conditions under which they've had to do so, a war for survival after Russia invaded them, are terrible. But within rapid speed, they have become the lead producer and innovator in producing drones. This is unimaginable. If the Ukrainians can do it, we can do it.
I think one of the things that we've forgotten is that it isn't just the public, these companies have abdicated responsibility for protecting the public in the virtual world. It's also the democratic countries, including the EU, has abdicated responsibility for protecting the public in the virtual world. And what do I mean by that? It's something called the public interest tech stack. Germany builds libraries, they have parks, and yet in the virtual world, we've been pushed into an extremely predatory environment that commodifies everything about us as human beings. Our data, our actions, our relationships, our emotions, right? Why is there no public interest tech stack? So that's what I am hoping that the EU will realize that this is necessary, and that citizens in these countries, including in my country, that we realize that this is important. Again, I looked at what is already out there, what tech is out. And what we saw with the Matrix protocol is that it is also interoperable. Meaning, if you're on WhatsApp, I can actually connect to you. You can come to the Matrix from WhatsApp. It's just decentralized and your data is protected, right? What many of these companies have done for what you call the network effect is wallet and then keep you addicted. There are more healthier ways of creating this virtual world that isn't actually manipulating us. And those are the things I look for. We build tech. My responsibility in Rappler is our business and our tech. And I love the tech. I was, in 2012 when we started Rappler, I loved Facebook. So it feels like, such a betrayal to see the surveillance for profit that has commodified us. The promise was so good. Well, they haven't delivered on the promise. And now the question is going to be, what will governments do? The EU has been at the forefront of protecting citizens, but it hasn't been enough, because what you see hand in hand with that are the largest lobbies globally, right? In the United States, this was 3 years ago, the lobby alone was $60–70 million a year. In the EU, when they were debating the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, the lobby was 125 to 150 million euros a year. Right? So don't fall for the hype. In fact, there will be, what we're seeing now with generative AI, are you using ChatGPT, Llama, all of these, right? If you're using these right now, it is at best a 16% error rate, and at worst, a 79% error rate. It is a probabilistic machine. It takes words and dismantles them and finds the probable next one, but it isn't about meaning. Human beings live lives of real connections and a search for meaning. We need tech that will allow that.
you've already tried the microphone again. And you asked a question about Asia, but please go ahead if you want to respond to that immediately.
Well, no, I can just agree, so feel free to move on.
Yeah, okay. So we have been talking about the power that the European Union has and also what they, for example, can do to maybe create alternatives, including, let's say, how governments buy technology. Now, in Asia, tell us a little about the situation there. There isn't such a bloc that is comparable to the European Union, but of course there is ASEAN and other regional collaborations. Is there a discussion about this, and what does it look like? Are you optimistic about it? Is it lacking? What is your assessment?
We're just starting. I think part of it is because in the Philippines, for example, for 6 years in a row, Filipinos, until 2021, Filipinos spent the most time online and on social media globally. If you heard me, the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower actually said that Cambridge Analytica tested tactics of mass manipulation in the Philippines, and if it worked, they ported it over. The main target was America, but to the West. If you're on these platforms, you are, so we were the guinea pigs, you were the target. Why? We don't have the money, you do. So what we learned though is that actually more Filipinos understand this is manipulative. And what I'm hoping, we now have a cabinet secretary that understands. He's a former CTO of a bank. We have now data people that are starting. So much data has been stolen in the Philippines. So I'm hoping things will move. Indonesia, world's largest Muslim population. ASEAN can be a force, but we're baby steps still away from it. Singapore has a law in place, but where I hope to join up is with the Latin American countries. This is where you gotta look at Brazil. Is anyone here from Brazil? Brazil, the one who is holding the line against President Trump, right? President Lula of Brazil refuses. There's pressure on the government to actually, drop regulations, very similar to what you're feeling here. But Brazil has decided not to and in fact, in the G20 last year, Brazil put information integrity at the top of the agenda. They began a 20-nation grouping in the United Nations called Democracia Sempre, with information integrity at the front. So what I hope is if you guys here in the global north fail to hold the line, that we in the global south will find new leadership that will come and reclaim our rights.
Maybe, yeah. So I just want to build on a few things that Maria said, because Maria said Cambridge Analytica and those who tried to manipulate public opinion came to the Philippines because we didn't have money. But there's another reason that they probably came to the Philippines is that you didn't have laws. And so I think it's really important to appreciate the value of laws, but also to appreciate, and I think Maria is a living example of that, of how little we've been willing to learn from people in the global south. Because only when Cambridge Analytica started to manipulate people in the UK and in the US were people like, oh, wait a minute, and some of them actually thought it was a good idea, but a number of people got concerned, even though in countries like the Philippines, in Kenya, in other parts of the world, the writings were on the wall. And I think it's the same for social media platforms. We all know about how Facebook became a platform for not only hate speech, but also physical violence in Myanmar and genocide. And I think it's incredible that we still fail sort of collectively to appreciate the lessons we can already learn from countries that are not, in Europe or North America on what the harms are. And I think if we learn these lessons better, bring these lessons over, we can also learn solutions like the ones that you brought up, like what the Brazilians are doing, to take inspiration from what holding the line is. Because in fact, the crackdowns on free speech, the crackdowns on fundamental freedoms of the US Constitution are very serious, and people need inspiration of how to stand up to a dictator. I can only recommend the book, but really to appreciate that everybody has agency at every step, even if it's hard. And unfortunately, there are many lessons learned in the rest of the world that we are just not collectively benefiting from in that fight?
I'd like to pick up on that, hold the line. You gave excellent examples, and it's fascinating that, you mentioned Brazil, and there was this instance before when a federal judge said, oh, we are going to ban X if they don't play by the rules. And of course, Elon Musk tried to use all his power and his network to push back against this, and in the end he gave in. Because they said, it's our law, it's our country, and you have to play by the rules. Yes, and I think many have the impression that this is not really working out at the moment in Europe, because people are talking about, let's say, again, the DSA as tech regulation, and they don't see it what it is, in my opinion. It is trying to protect democracy. And what they do is they sort of trade it against tax cuts or tariff cuts with regards to, for example, cars and pharmaceuticals. Now, I'd say there's a lot to learn from other countries. But the question that I would like to pose to both of you, because you both now live parts of the year in the United States, and what we have not seen over the last several decades are any meaningful attempts to regulate tech in the country where it comes from, where it is done, first and foremost. Is there something that can give us hope there, even in times of a Trump administration?
Yes. Well, so yes, the US has been very slow to put up guardrails around various technologies, and it would have made such a difference if it did. In fact, President Biden at the end of his term tried, but because he didn't have the majorities in Congress, all he could use was his executive power, which he did, a number of executive orders. He even wrote op-eds about what it is he would like to see with regard to privacy protection, protection of minors. The US, under Democratic leadership of the previous administration, led the way to focus on AI safety. There was a brief moment of global unique moment, especially in today's world, where the governments of all countries all over the world realized AI could be so powerful that it has serious consequences, including for our safety, and so we have to step up. I think one of the problems in Europe there is that national security is not an EU competence, and so countries can make their own assessments about what is a security threat. The US has always left a lot of freedom to the markets, so has had hands-off approach on the part of governments, except when it comes to national security. I think it's something that people forget. When it comes to national security, there is a heavy reliance on government, and also there's a lot of space for a law enforcement to interfere. Where I see hope is on the level of states, because where the federal government has a deep regulatory agenda now, President Trump even tried to prevent states from adopting AI laws for 10 years. It is an unheard of move from a US president, and thankfully it failed, but it shows you where their minds are. And I think the states appreciate, and especially the citizens of these states appreciate, that if they want their kids to be protected from addictive algorithms, if they want some kind of data protection and not to see their data training algorithms for the AI companies, or if they don't want facial recognition that discriminates against Black or otherwise ethnic minorities in the United States, they have to go to the state level. And there the interesting question becomes, what do the companies